Zangief is always the fun to pick topic.
Yes.
Yeah. Regardless whether the character is good or not, Zangief discussion is always fun.
Yeah, there's a lot of strong emotions and feelings about grapplers in general.
Mm-hmm.
And you are a Dawson player. We need to disclose that
yes.
first. So there might be a little bit of bias
Super
here.
bias.
But we got a win at First Attack in Puerto Rico with Men RD. And then we also got a tournament win from
East Coast Throwdown.
East Coast Throwdown with Itabashi Zangief, who has Zangief in his name.
He's got Zangief in his name. So, like, that's another thing, right? Itabashi is the name of a region in Japan, and the Zangief is a fighting game character. He has the guts to have, like, where he's from and the character name as his gamer tag.
Dude,
How cool is that?
That's a badass thing. I remember in the 4 days, PR Balrog was known for being Puerto Rican Balrog. That's originally what I think some people thought that PR stood for, like a sponsor name or something, but it was actually Puerto Rican Balrog, and he played Balrog really, really well. One of the top players in Street Fighter 4 at the time. So I guess we can kind of segue into this through Itabashi Zangief, who is actually very well respected in Virtua Fighter.
Yeah, Itabashi Zangief and a few other Street Fighter players like Fudo, they've always been a legend in the Virtua Fighter scene as well.
Yeah.
I personally have had the honor to see them play Virtua Fighter. This was back in early 2012 or 2013 in Australia.
Yeah, I remember. I think even Itabashi and Fudo were in the grand finals at one tournament. It
could have been our tournament. It could have been our tournament in Shadow Lu Showdown.
So, it might have been that, yeah.
We invited some Japanese players as well as some internationals. There were, in the Virtua Fighter top 3, I believe it was, I could be wrong, I have to do some research on this, but I remember it was Fudo, Itazan, and Ryan Hart.
Oh, yeah. Ryan Hart also has some 3D
Ryan
street
Hart's
cred.
really good in 3D as well.
Yeah.
Shout out to him.
This is one of the things that makes them such special players, that they can be dominant in 2D, but also dominant in 3D. And one of the things about the Every Fighting Game type explained video was to try to distinguish those kinds of games and not just the graphical aspects, right? So I guess the very first part of the 3D section, I talk about how realistic the game is. That's one of the things where that Game FAQs person wrote about. How realistic.
That would have been the guide that had the most votes, most ratings. So it was a very popular one too.
Yeah, back then, this is kind of how we figured out about games, learned about games, and even like in the Game FAQs, people talking about the games and the history. These are passionate people. If they're making an FAQ, which
on a notepad.
Yeah, on a notepad. Yeah. FAQ, actually, that means frequently asked questions. But these just ended up being guides. I guess frequently asked questions and guides are kind of overlapping. But this guy just wrote about how much he really loved the idea of Virtua Fighter and how it kind of was distinct from the popular fighting games at the time. And he basically threw shade at Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat without mentioning those games. Right. He basically said that this is a game that really is great without having to resort to magic moves, which is the special move, which is Honda headbutts and fireballs and electrocution coming out of electricity coming out of your body. And then the violence, which is obviously a knock at Mortal Kombat, right? Mortal Kombat was known for that during that time. So Virtua Fighter was kind of a fresh new way of thinking about the archetypal fighting game, because you still had the high-low, the stand ducking, the life bars, the timer. There were a few things that kind of made it really distinct, one of which was the ring out system. That was pretty new because these other fighting games had walls where would try to push your opponent to the wall where they can no longer go back, and you would have an advantage because they couldn't backdash or they couldn't walk back or jump back anymore.
Nowhere to run, kind of. Yeah.
But in Virtua Fighter, if you went to the edge, you just lost. It was ring out. But at the same time, while it was known as a 3D game, the 3D movement was not really a thing. You couldn't really control your character into going into the background or foreground, except with the exception of rolling.
Right.
So there was no such thing as like a sidestep command.
Not at the time. No.
At the time. And so it was a 3D game, but it was a very like early stages of a 3D game, but it actually influenced a lot because if you look at some of the animations in Virtua Fighter, those animations have been used in so many 3D games going forward.
Yeah, you can notice some of the because I guess in the 3D graphics world, they call it rigging, when they rig the skeletons of the humanoid models. Some of them are very noticeable, even in the modern 3D, not just fighting games, but many other games that require humanoid models. Yeah. And that was pretty interesting. And when you mentioned that throwing shade at Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat, I think the developers were also subtly throwing shade at the jump mechanic.
Oh.
Because jumps were very low gravity. It's like we called it the moon jump.
Yeah.
In the early Virtua Fighters and even early Tekken.
Yeah.
Yeah. By adding a ring out, it teaches people not to jump as much.
Yeah, that's actually true. Okay, so the way that you're seeing this is, so you're saying that maybe that they made it like that so they can throw shade at the whole idea of jumping by making it as ridiculous as possible. Yeah. For me, I just thought that, well, this is just a remnant of the high jumping that you had in 2D games, like Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter, but they just didn't implement it correctly. So that's kind of an interesting observation. I'd love to, if I spoke Japanese, I would love to go to Japan and find the creators and see what they have to say about that.
Awesome.
But that's
I'm only saying that because in the arcade days, because we have a good mix of players who are really competitive and players who are very casual.
Sure.
But regardless of what skill level you are, you would always see people like try to cheese you out using the timer scan mechanic.
Of course.
By holding back. And they're just jumping back like infinitely.
Yeah.
You do that in Virtua Fighter, you ring yourself out.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. That's
so it's like, you cannot run away from me.
Yeah.
You gotta fight me one-on-one in a fair fight with no magic and no jumping.
Yeah. I think actually Virtua Fighter, the timer went, there's less time in